Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little different. Forget battles, plagues, or shadowy assassins for a moment. Tonight, we're sneaking into bedrooms, or at least the medieval equivalent, because yes, sleep is universal, and the Middle Ages had some interesting ideas about it. And by interesting, I mean downright bizarre. But before we dive in, let me ask you this. How is your day going so far? And we'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? It matters to us, connecting across time and space, even if it's just through headphones and a cozy bed. If today has been long or stressful, here's a little ritual. Put on your headphones, lie back, close your eyes, and let this story gently float you away. Let it carry the weight of your day so you can feel lighter, calmer, maybe even a little free. All right, let's get to it. Medieval sleep was flexible, to say the least. People didn't necessarily follow the strict 8-hour cycle we imagine today. Instead, they often practiced first sleep and second sleep. The night was split in two. First, they'd sleep for a few hours after dusk, then wake for an hour or two in the middle of the night, before drifting back into a second, shorter sleep until dawn. During that interlude, people might pray, write letters, visit neighbors, or yes, sneak a drink or a smoke if they were particularly rebellious. Imagine lying awake in the quiet dark, candle flickering, while half the village is up and about. Spooky, but also kind of charming. Beds themselves were another adventure. Wealthy people slept in canopied wooden structures, often shared with children, servants, or even livestock, because heat was appreciated, apparently. Poorer peasants, meanwhile, might sleep on straw mattresses, or simply a pile of blankets in a corner of the main room. Privacy was rare, comfort was relative, and personal space was basically a medieval luxury concept. And let's not forget sleep positions. There's some evidence that people often slept sitting up or propped against walls, not necessarily lying flat. Spinal health? Comfort? Who knows? But it makes you wonder about the medieval chiropractor's business model, probably booming, and some people slept with one eye open, which makes sense if you lived in a crowded hall with fire hazards, roaming animals, or the occasional drunken visitor. Temperature, light, and sound mattered too, but in ways we wouldn't expect. Drafty rooms, freezing winters, or the constant smell of smoke from indoor fires didn't stop people from trying to get rest. Candles or lanterns were often left burning, both as a precaution against monsters or burglars, and as a means of maintaining warmth. White noise, smoke, crackling fire, and occasional snoring filled the air. Sleep wasn't serene. It was survival, mixed with necessity. Dreams played a special role. Some people believed that the first sleep brought important dreams, messages from God, or warnings of misfortune. So waking in the middle of the night wasn't wasted time. It was a spiritual opportunity, a moment to interpret visions or pray for guidance. Nighttime wasn't just for rest. It was an intersection of practicality, superstition, and ritual. Then there were the quirks. People often slept fully clothed or in their day garments because stripping down was seen as risky, indulgent, or unnecessary. Some used herbs like lavender or valerian to induce sleep or mask the smell of a not-so-fresh room. Others believed in placing objects under pillows, rosary beads, charms, or even sharp items to ward off nightmares, evil spirits, or overly nosy neighbors. Even when we consider medieval royalty, sleep was far from uniform. Kings and queens had elaborate bedtime rituals, warm baths, fragrant oils, attendants fluffing pillows, and nightly prayers. Yet they too observed segmented sleep, with some historians noting that nighttime awakenings were not considered interruptions, but a normal rhythm. Some monarchs even used these quiet hours for clandestine meetings, secret correspondence, or the occasional scandalous rendezvous, because why not double down on intrigue while everyone else is dozing? Sleep wasn't just about the individual either. It was communal. In inns, taverns, and even some homes, multiple people shared the same sleeping space. Noise, snoring, and unexpected visitors were common. Medieval people tolerated all of it because, well, sleep had to happen somewhere. And somehow, despite all the challenges, drafts, dirt, crowded rooms, and the occasional rat, people still managed to rest, dream, and survive. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your bed, think about it. Medieval people slept weird, fragmented, communal, occasionally dangerous lives. Their beds, rooms, and night rituals were shaped by necessity, superstition, and comfort wherever they could find it. And as you close your eyes, imagine a flickering candle, a chill in the corner of the room, and the gentle rhythm of segmented sleep carrying over from centuries past. Because sleep, in the end, has always been universal, bizarre, inconvenient, communal, sacred, or chaotic, and yet, somehow, we all survive it. Alright, so we've peeked at beds, segmented sleep, and the quirks of medieval snoozing. Now let's drift deeper into the rituals, beliefs, and occasional absurdities that shaped how people approached bedtime. First up, superstitions. Medieval people were cautious about the dark, and not without reason. Nighttime was associated with spirits, demons, and restless souls. Candles weren't just practical, they were protective. Some households placed a candle at each corner of the room to ward off evil. Others placed charms under pillows, hung herbs above beds, or even sprinkled salt in doorways. Sleep was as much about defense as rest. Rituals were surprisingly detailed. Before going to bed, a person might say prayers, sprinkle holy water, or recite protective verses. Even common folk had these routines, not just royalty. It was believed that these small acts ensured safe passage into sleep and reduced the risk of nightmares or spiritual intrusion. Imagine lying in a cramped, drafty room with all these charms and whispers around you. It was a cozy blend of caution and superstition. Then there were personal bedtime routines. Some people took baths at dusk, believing it helped cleanse the body and the soul. Others chewed specific herbs like rosemary or mint to ensure sweet dreams. Royalty sometimes enjoyed warm milk or honey before bed, while peasants had to rely on whatever scraps or warm drinks were available. Comfort, like we imagine it today, was relative, but everyone had their own nightly rhythm. Sleeping arrangements reflected social hierarchy. but also practicality. Nobles had canopied beds, attendants, and multiple blankets. They sometimes shared the space with their children, pets, or even favored servants. Peasants slept together for warmth, often in the main living area, and frequently with animals. The communal nature of sleep meant privacy was scarce, but heat, practicality, and shared survival outweighed modesty. Nighttime beliefs also dictated behavior during first and second sleep. People thought waking in the middle of the night was a chance for reflection, prayer, or secret conversation. Some even visited neighbors or wandered the village quietly, taking care not to disturb anyone. It wasn't laziness or insomnia. It was a culturally accepted pattern. First sleep and second sleep were natural, almost sacred, and the awake hours in between were often purposeful. Dreams themselves carried significance. People interpreted them as messages, warnings, omens, or guidance. Keeping a dream journal? Not exactly, but recounting or sharing dreams was common. Religious figures often provided interpretations, blending spirituality and psychology in ways that seem quaint, mystical, or downright inventive to us now. Even the oddities weren't rare. Some people slept fully clothed to avoid drafts, or because undressing was impractical. Others positioned their bodies upright or slightly angled against walls. Floors, blankets, and straw beds dictated posture more than preference. Cold winters, heat from fires, and the occasional vermin intrusion shaped the very nature of sleep. Royal bedtime rituals took this to another level. Monarchs had attendants who fluffed pillows, drew curtains, and even monitored the temperature of the room. They bathed, anointed themselves with oils, and performed prayers, while servants waited silently. Some slept in segmented patterns too, using the awake hours for clandestine correspondence, planning, or very discreet social activities. Because why not maximize productivity while everyone else snoozed? Communal and societal norms also influenced sleep. Inns, monasteries, and large homes were noisy, smelly, and often crowded. Snoring, coughing, and occasional arguments were part of the nightly ambiance. People tolerated these conditions because sleep was essential, not optional, and everyone had to make do with whatever circumstances the night provided. So tonight, as you relax with your headphones on, imagine a flickering candle, herbs hanging from beams, charms tucked beneath pillows, and families or strangers drifting through their segmented sleep. The night was simultaneously protective, mystical, and practical, a delicate balance of superstition, ritual, and human necessity. Medieval sleep wasn't perfect or even particularly comfortable by modern standards, but it was functional, culturally rich, and surprisingly inventive. And as you sink into your own bed tonight, you're participating in a human tradition that spans centuries, bizarre, communal, ritualized, and utterly universal. All right, so we've wandered through beds, segmented sleep, and nightly rituals. But what about the less pleasant side of medieval slumber? Nightmares and insomnia? Because yes, even in the Middle Ages, sleep wasn't always peaceful. Nightmares were often interpreted as messages, warnings from God, demonic interference, or premonitions of misfortune. They weren't merely unpleasant dreams. They were spiritually significant. A poor peasant waking from a nightmare might immediately pray, sprinkle holy water, or repeat protective verses. Nobility had similar practices, though with added ceremony, chants, bells, or even charms placed under pillows. Imagine waking in a sweat, heart racing, only to find a small ritual waiting to cleanse the fright away. Insomnia was another common issue, unlike today, where caffeine and stress might be the culprits. Medieval sleeplessness often came from environmental factors. Drafty rooms, overcrowding, fires, cold winters, and even the sound of livestock all contributed. But superstition played a role too. Some believed that thinking of sins, evil spirits, or certain thoughts during the day could prevent sleep at night. Others blamed curses, bad luck, or improper ritual. Sleep was as psychological as it was physical. To combat nightmares and insomnia, medieval people employed a variety of remedies. Herbs were extremely popular. Lavender, rosemary, chamomile, and valerian were used to induce relaxation or ward off evil dreams. Some people chewed them. Others placed them in pillows or sprinkled them around the bed. Imagine a room filled with the faint smell of herbs, candles flickering, and a faint layer of hope that this small ritual would grant a full night of rest. Hot baths and warm drinks were also common. Milk, honey, and occasionally alcohol were used to calm the body. Nobility often enjoyed baths before bed to relax muscles and soothe the mind. Peasants did their best with available resources, sometimes sharing a single warm bath among several family members. Comfort was relative, but intent mattered more than luxury. Sleeping positions could help or hinder rest. Upright sleeping, or sleeping slightly propped, was sometimes recommended for those troubled by bad dreams or congestion. Some people believed that certain orientations of the body influenced the soul's journey in sleep, though this varied regionally. And yes, some people kept talismans or charms close to the bed, because apparently a little spiritual reinforcement never hurt. Monasteries offer an interesting perspective. Monks and nuns had strict schedules for sleep and prayer, often segmented by canonical hours. Sleep was brief and highly regulated. They also believed in meditative or contemplative techniques to calm the mind. Insomnia was often treated through prayer or reflection on sacred texts. In a way, the spiritual approach to sleep paralleled modern mindfulness practices, except with more chanting and less app notifications. Even the concept of shared sleeping spaces impacted rest. In large halls, multiple people slept together, making noise, coughing, or snoring inevitable. Privacy was minimal. Sleep was tolerated, adapted to, and ritualized. Nightmares and sleeplessness were communal experiences, shared silently among family members or fellow residents. And yet, despite all the drafts, noise, and superstition, medieval people managed to rest, dream, and survive. Their remedies, whether herbs, rituals, or structured sleep patterns, reveal a culture deeply attuned to both body and mind. They recognized that rest was not optional, but essential, even if the methods were occasionally quirky, fragrant, or ritual heavy. So tonight, as you relax, and sink deeper into your own bed. Imagine a world of flickering candlelight, herbal scents, whispered prayers, and careful rituals, all aimed at guiding humans into sleep. Nightmares, insomnia, and spiritual beliefs were all part of the tapestry of medieval slumber. And as you drift, remember, sleep, in its many forms, has always been a delicate balance of body, mind, and culture. All right, so we've explored nightmares, insomnia, and sleep remedies. Now let's get up close and personal with medieval beds, bedding, and, well, the weird realities of their bedrooms. Because yes, sleep is only half the story. Where you slept and how you slept mattered just as much. First off, beds were status symbols as much as they were places to rest. Nobles and royalty had canopied beds, sometimes draped with expensive fabrics, like velvet or embroidered linen. The canopies weren't just decorative. They kept warmth in, drafts out, and occasionally prying eyes away. Poorer folk, not so lucky, they often slept on straw-filled mattresses, mats, or piles of blankets, usually in the main living area, sharing space with family and, occasionally, animals. Speaking of animals, co-sleeping with livestock wasn't uncommon. Goats, pigs, and dogs provided warmth in drafty rooms, and space was limited. Imagine trying to stretch out fully while a goat nudges your foot for attention. Not exactly the spa experience we imagine today, but effective in a pinch. Bedding materials varied widely. Feathers were a luxury, straw was common, and moss or wool might fill mattresses for extra padding. Blankets were layered to provide insulation, sometimes augmented with animal skins. Nobility had multiple sheets and coverings, often rotated seasonally. The concept of a single, comfy blanket is a modern indulgence. Medieval people made do with what they had and layered smartly to survive the cold nights. Beds weren't always single-person affairs either. Couples, children, and servants might share the same bed, sometimes for warmth, sometimes for practicality. Privacy was a luxury. Sleeping arrangements could be crowded, noisy, and occasionally uncomfortable. But survival and comfort sometimes outweighed modesty. Then there's the weird part: sleeping positions and furniture quirks. Beds were sometimes propped or angled to improve circulation, digestion, or even spiritual alignment. Headboards could be carved with protective symbols or inscriptions to ward off evil spirits or bad dreams. Some wealthy households had small platforms or raised areas for children or elderly members, while others slept on the floor entirely. Sleeping posture was influenced more by pragmatism than preference. Temperature was another major factor. Medieval homes were cold, drafty, and sometimes smoky. Fireplaces were essential, though heat was uneven and fleeting. Blankets, bed curtains, and even the strategic placement of animals helped people cope. Candles or oil lamps might be left burning for warmth or protection, creating flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Cozy for some, eerie for others. Now let's talk about cleanliness, or lack thereof. Bedding wasn't washed frequently, and personal hygiene varied widely. Nobility might bathe more often, but peasants relied on limited water and sometimes shared beds with family members in less than pristine conditions. Herbs, oils, and scented fabrics were often used to mask odors or provide a sense of freshness. Mint, lavender, and rosemary weren't just for ritual. They were practical solutions to smelly rooms and crowded sleeping areas. And finally, let's not forget bedroom rituals. Beds were often surrounded by charms, religious icons, or small, personal belongings. People believed that the right placement of objects could ward off nightmares, evil spirits, or illness. Some even slept fully clothed or partially dressed to avoid cold, or because it was simply the norm. The medieval bedroom was a multifunctional space, sanctuary, sleeping area, and spiritual safeguard all in one. So tonight, as you settle deeper into your own bed, imagine layers of blankets, flickering candles, herbs hanging from beams, and the occasional animal snuggled in for warmth. Picture the beds of kings, queens, peasants, and monks, all differently furnished, differently arranged, yet all serving the same purpose: sleep, survival, and a tiny bit of comfort in a world that wasn't always gentle. Because sleep, in its many forms, has always been essential, inventive, and a little weird. And as you drift off, think of the medieval bedroom not as strange or uncomfortable, but as a testament to human creativity and resilience in the pursuit of rest. All right, so we've explored beds, bedding, and bedroom quirks. Now let's take a little trip across medieval Europe to see just how differently people approached sleep. Because what passed for normal in one region could be downright bizarre in another. In England, for example, the practice of segmented sleep, first sleep and second sleep, was common. People rose in the middle of the night to pray, read, or quietly visit neighbors. It wasn't insomnia. It was culturally normal. Middle of the night wakefulness was seen as a chance to connect with the divine, reflect on daily events, or even enjoy a secret snack. Imagine waking up in the dead of night and treating it as a productive little ritual. In France, wealthier households had intricate bedtime routines, warm baths, scented oils, attendants fluffing pillows, and prayers were all part of the nightly rhythm. Nobles often slept with more than one person in a bed: children, servants, and sometimes lovers. Candles were left burning, both for warmth and spiritual protection. And as always, the fear of evil spirits or bad dreams influenced how beds were arranged, where objects were placed, and even the orientation of the sleeper. Italy had its own quirks. People sometimes slept fully clothed or partially dressed to maintain warmth in drafty rooms. Herbs were tucked into pillows, and certain scents were used to encourage sleep or discourage nightmares. Florence and Venice, with their bustling streets, often had homes where noise was unavoidable. Sleep became a skill, the ability to rest amidst sound, light, and occasional chaos. In Germany, monasteries had strict sleep schedules for monks. Sleep was brief, segmented, and regulated around prayer times. Some monks practiced silent meditation before bed to calm the mind. Insomnia was often treated spiritually through prayer, reflection, or scripture. The night was a structured combination of rest and devotion, which seems oddly familiar to modern mindfulness routines, minus the apps and tea blends. Scandinavia, Cold winters meant layering blankets, sharing beds with family and animals, and sometimes sleeping near the fire. Drafts, snow-covered walls, and long nights required creativity in sleep arrangements. People used raised platforms, straw mattresses, or even animal skins to survive freezing temperatures. Privacy wasn't a concern. Warmth and practicality were. Even within each country, practices varied by social class. Peasants focused on survival and warmth, often sleeping communally. Nobles emphasized comfort, rituals, and status symbols in bed design and nightly routines. Monks and nuns followed strict spiritual guidelines. Across Europe, sleep was influenced by climate, religion, superstition, and social hierarchy. What's considered weird in one context might be perfectly normal elsewhere. Then, there were local superstitions. In some regions, people believed that opening the window a crack at night invited good dreams or warded off evil. In others, leaving shoes near the bed or sprinkling salt was essential for safety during sleep. Each community adapted to its environment, combining practicality, ritual, and belief to survive the night. And don't forget communal living. Inns, halls, and even castles often had shared sleeping spaces. Noise, snoring, and uninvited visitors were normal. People tolerated it because sleep wasn't optional. Everyone, from king to peasant, had to find a way to rest despite these conditions. So tonight, as you sink into your own bed, imagine the nights across medieval Europe, the flicker of candlelight in France, herbs tucked into Italian pillows, cold drafts in Scandinavia, and the quiet meditation of German monks. Different customs, different comforts, but the same goal: sleep, rest, and a little bit of safety in the dark. Medieval sleep may seem strange, fragmented, or uncomfortable, but it was a testament to human creativity, resilience, and the universal need for rest. And as you drift off tonight, remember, no matter where or when, humans have always found ways to close their eyes and survive the night. All right, so we've traveled across Europe and seen how beds, bedding, and sleeping customs varied. Now let's float into the slightly darker, stranger side of medieval sleep. Night terrors, superstitions, and the inventive folk remedies people relied on to survive the night. First, a note on night terrors. Unlike modern insomnia, which we often blame on stress or caffeine, medieval people saw night terrors as more than physical phenomena. They were sometimes considered spiritual attacks, demonic interference, or even curses. If a person awoke in a panic, sweating and confused, neighbors might rush to help with prayers, charms, or sprinklings of holy water. For many, the night was alive with unseen forces, and sleep was as much about defense as rest. Herbal remedies were everywhere. People tucked lavender, valerian, rosemary, or sage under pillows or near the bed to ward off nightmares. These weren't just for scent. They were believed to influence the spirit and protect the sleeper. Imagine a room faintly smelling of herbs, with candles flickering, shadows dancing across walls. An aromatic ritual to keep the night peaceful. Other remedies were more inventive. Some believed that sleeping with iron objects under the pillow kept evil spirits at bay. Others hung garlic, charms, or religious icons above the bed. In some communities, People even slept with bells near the bed to signal danger, or perhaps just to make sure the cat didn't wander off. Practicality and superstition often overlapped in surprisingly creative ways. Bedtime beliefs also influenced posture. Some thought that sleeping a certain direction, often aligned with compass points, could protect the soul. Sleeping upright or propped slightly was sometimes recommended for digestion, dreams, or spiritual reasons. These quirks weren't arbitrary. They were attempts to control the uncontrollable. Sleep itself. Communal sleeping added another layer. In halls, inns, or large households, multiple people shared rooms, and sometimes beds. Noise, snoring, and even disagreements were part of the nightly landscape. People had to develop a tolerance for disruption, layering blankets, and creating personal spaces within the shared environment. Sleep wasn't luxurious. It was functional, social, and occasionally chaotic. Religious rituals were deeply entwined with sleep. Prayers, chants, and protective verses were often recited before lying down. Monks and nuns followed strict schedules, integrating short periods of rest with spiritual reflection. For lay people, bedtime prayers and charms provided reassurance against the dangers of darkness, creating psychological comfort even when physical conditions were harsh. Then, there were folk remedies. People drank herbal concoctions, warm milk, or occasionally alcohol to induce sleep. Others practiced visualization or recited poetry to calm the mind. Some communities believed that reciting family names, counting blessings, or whispering protective words could prevent bad dreams. The blend of superstition, psychology, and early pharmacology was surprisingly sophisticated. Despite all these rituals, fear of the night remained. Dark corners, creaking floorboards, and the possibility of fire or burglary made vigilance necessary. But humans adapted, combining sleep strategies, superstitions, and ingenuity to survive the long, often harsh nights. So tonight, as you close your eyes, picture medieval bedrooms alive with these practices. Herbs tucked under pillows, protective charms hanging above, candles flickering in every corner, and people performing quiet rituals to ward off terrors. Sleep was never guaranteed, but the effort to secure it shows both creativity and resilience. Medieval sleep was messy, fragmented, aromatic, and ritualized, but it worked. And as you drift off tonight, remember, every century, every culture has had its own quirks and innovations to help humans navigate the mysterious, essential world of sleep. All right, so we've navigated beds, remedies, and rituals. Now let's drift into some of the more peculiar beliefs medieval people had about the night, because apparently darkness was a very busy place. First up, dream omens. Dreams weren't just random firings of the brain. They were messages from the divine, premonitions, or warnings. A peasant dreaming of a black bird, bad luck. A noble seeing a falcon in sleep. Prophetic insight. People interpreted dreams carefully, sometimes consulting clergy or local wise women for advice. Middle of the night wakefulness often involved recounting these dreams aloud, as if verbalizing them could make sense of their meaning. Then there were protective rituals. People hung garlic, herbs, or charms around the bed to ward off spirits. Some carried small objects under their pillows, like stones or coins, believed to protect the sleeper. Candles weren't just for light. They were talismans, wards, and sources of comfort. Imagine drifting off, surrounded by fragrant herbs and the soft glow of candlelight, feeling simultaneously protected and slightly paranoid. Certain nighttime behaviors were outright prescribed. In some regions, stepping over a broom before bed was thought to prevent witches from visiting your dreams. Others believed that sleeping with a knife under the pillow could prevent malevolent spirits from harming the household. Practicality met superstition in fascinating ways. Monks and nuns had their own superstitions too. For them, night could be spiritually dangerous if approached carelessly. Improper prayers, lax rituals, or forgetting a protective chant might allow evil thoughts to infiltrate the mind. Silence, meditation, and precise sleeping schedules helped mitigate these risks. Sleep was part of spiritual discipline, not just bodily rest. Noise and environment played a role in superstition as well. Creaking floors, howling dogs, or wind whistling through cracks could be interpreted as supernatural presences. People responded with rituals, muttered prayers, moving the bed, or sprinkling holy water, even in the quietest room. Imagination and belief filled the darkness. Then there's cultural variation. Across Europe, beliefs differed widely. In Scandinavia, people might leave doors open at night to invite good spirits. In France, certain herbs or oils were specifically associated with sweet dreams. In Germany, bells or small charms could signal protection. Despite regional differences, the underlying purpose was consistent. Humans sought to control the uncontrollable, making the night predictable through ritual, superstition, and small acts of faith. Even animals weren't exempt. Cats, dogs, and livestock were thought to either protect against evil or inadvertently invite it. Sleeping with an animal near the bed could provide warmth, comfort, and spiritual safeguarding, or according to superstition, risk attracting misfortune. Medieval sleep was, in essence, a negotiation with the unknown. And then there were odd community-wide beliefs. Some villages organized group prayers or communal rituals at dusk to protect the entire settlement from nightmares or nocturnal malevolence. Candles might be lit in every home, bells rung, and doors sprinkled with salt, all collective acts to secure sleep. Sleep was simultaneously private, social, and spiritual. So tonight, as you sink into your own cozy bed, imagine medieval families, monks, and nobles performing their nightly dances of ritual, superstition, and belief. Herbs, charms, prayers, and candles, all employed to tame the night and grant a few hours of peace. The night was mysterious, slightly dangerous, and full of human ingenuity, but every precaution mattered. Medieval sleep, when viewed through this lens, wasn't just rest. It was an elaborate, fragrant, ritual-laden practice aimed at surviving darkness, dreams, and the unknown. And as you drift off tonight, remember, the creativity, resilience, and ritual of sleep have always been essential to the human experience. All right, so we've floated through superstition, rituals, and odd nighttime behaviors. Now let's drift into how medieval people actually slept when the seasons changed, and why winter was particularly challenging. Sleep was intimately tied to the natural rhythm of day and night. Without artificial lighting, people rose with the sun and went to bed soon after it set. Summer nights were longer, warm, and slightly more forgiving. Winter? Not so much. Nights were cold, dark, and mercilessly long. People had to get creative to survive them. Cold winters meant layered blankets, shared beds, and sometimes sleeping very close to the fire. Wealthy households had feather mattresses, thick linens, and heated bricks, or small braziers to ward off frost. Peasants relied on straw, animal skins, and close body contact. Privacy was often sacrificed for warmth. Imagine huddling under piles of blankets with family members and a few animals, trying to stay asleep while the wind howled outside. Not exactly a luxury retreat, but effective. Seasonal shifts also affected sleep duration and segmentation. In winter, longer nights encouraged the practice of first sleep and second sleep. People would wake in the middle of the night for prayer, quiet chores, or simply to stretch and reposition themselves. Summer nights were shorter, and sleep often became more continuous. People adapted naturally to the length of darkness. Food scarcity in winter added another layer. A poor or malnourished person might sleep poorly, plagued by hunger. Nobles, meanwhile, might overeat at winter feasts, leading to indigestion and restless nights. Medieval sleep was not just about blankets or superstition. It was about survival, nutrition, and the environment. Cold also influenced sleeping positions. People slept curled tightly to preserve warmth, or close to walls and fireplaces. Feather beds and straw mattresses provided some insulation, but drafts were unavoidable. Some families even built small sleeping platforms above the ground to stay away from the cold, damp floors. Practicality drove innovation in ways we often overlook today. Lighting remained minimal. Candles or oil lamps offered warmth, guidance, and a sense of safety, yet leaving them on all night was risky. Fire was always a threat. People had to balance illumination and safety, another factor shaping medieval sleep habits. Seasonal illnesses also played a role. Winter brought colds, fevers, and respiratory issues. Sleeping in a cold, damp room could exacerbate problems. Remedies included extra layers, herbs like rosemary and thyme, and, in wealthier households, early forms of heated bedding. Comfort and health were intertwined, even if imperfectly. Even animals adapted to seasons. Pets or livestock sleeping indoors provided warmth, but also brought odors, pests, and occasional disturbances. The presence of animals was a calculated risk. Warmth versus noise versus hygiene. People accepted these compromises because cold winter nights demanded it. So tonight, as you snuggle into your own warm bed, imagine the medieval winters. Snow outside, fire crackling, blankets layered, family members close, and candles flickering. The nights were long, cold, and challenging, but human ingenuity, adaptation, and a little superstition kept sleep possible. Medieval, seasonal sleep patterns remind us that rest has always been shaped by environment, necessity, and creativity. And as you drift into your own modern winter, or summer slumber, remember that humans have always found ways to survive the night, no matter how cold, dark, or difficult it might have been. All right, so we've navigated cold winters, layered bedding, and seasonal sleep patterns. Now, let's drift into the imaginative world of medieval dreams and the storytelling traditions that helped people drift off into slumber. Because, let's be honest, sleep wasn't just about rest. It was also about the mind wandering safely into fantasy. Dreams were taken very seriously in the Middle Ages. They were considered messages, sometimes divine, sometimes prophetic, sometimes warnings of imminent danger. People would recount dreams upon waking, interpret them, and even act on them. A dream about a snake? Possibly a warning about a deceitful friend. A dream about a river could indicate travel, wealth, or emotional turbulence. Dream interpretation was an entire cottage industry, if you will. Long before psychology books or online forums existed, storytelling before sleep was a crucial cultural practice. Families, communities, and monasteries often gathered to share tales that were entertaining, educational, or morally instructive. For peasants, these stories might be about clever animals, saints, or local legends. Nobility enjoyed epic poems, romances, and heroic sagas. The stories provided not just amusement, but a framework for moral understanding and social norms. Even the structure of these stories reflected sleep habits. Segmented sleep and long nights encouraged episodic storytelling. One story before first sleep, another before second sleep. Nighttime tales were often calm, rhythmic, and repetitive, designed to soothe rather than excite. Loud, shocking stories were avoided, except perhaps during festive occasions. Monks, nuns, and scholars had their own bedtime storytelling, primarily spiritual or historical texts. Recitation of sacred or classical literature helped calm the mind, regulate breathing, and prepare the body for rest. The cadence of words, the rhythm of sentences, and the familiarity of themes created a gentle mental lullaby. For the general populace, storytelling was also a form of communal bonding. Tales passed down through generations helped preserve culture, provide guidance, and entertain during long, dark nights. Imagining a heroic knight, a clever fox, or a mischievous spirit allowed listeners to mentally escape the harsh realities of medieval life. Sleep became a transition into an imaginative space, guided by narrative and cultural memory. Dreams and storytelling were intertwined. What people heard before sleep influenced what they dreamed. Reading, reciting, or listening to stories could shape nighttime visions, sometimes in comforting ways, sometimes eerily. Medieval people were very aware of this, carefully selecting stories and prayers to influence sleep positively. Even the physical environment complemented these practices. Dim candlelight, the smell of herbs, the warmth of blankets, and the close presence of family created an atmosphere conducive to safe dreaming. Noise and chaos were minimized, and rituals like prayers, charms, or herbal infusions helped prepare the mind and body. Sleep was a holistic experience, integrating mind, body, and environment. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, imagine medieval listeners leaning close to hear a tale. Picture families, monks, or nobles drifting into dreams shaped by stories, prayers, and imagination. Consider how these rituals and narratives guided the mind gently into sleep, balancing caution, culture, and curiosity. Medieval dreams and pre-sleep storytelling remind us that sleep has always been more than physical rest. It is a mental, cultural, and emotional experience, an intimate bridge between waking life and the world of imagination. And as you drift off tonight, let your mind wander safely through stories, visions, and the gentle whispers of history. All right, so we've floated through dreams, stories, and imaginative rituals. Now, let's gently drift into the way religion shaped medieval sleep. Because in the Middle Ages, spiritual life and rest were tightly intertwined. Religion wasn't just a daytime affair. Prayers, chants, and devotional rituals punctuated the day and framed the night. Monks, nuns, and devout lay people followed strict sleep schedules that reflected spiritual priorities. Sleeping too long or neglecting prayers before bed was considered not just laziness, but morally questionable. The night was a sacred space where the body rested, but the soul remained alert, ready for contemplation. Many households had simple rituals before sleep. Saying prayers, reciting psalms, or whispering protective verses was standard. Even peasants, despite limited literacy, often knew a few crucial prayers by heart. Candles were lit, not only for warmth, but also for divine protection. Herbs, charms, and candles combined physical comfort with spiritual reassurance, creating a multi-layered nighttime defense. Monastic communities had particularly regimented nights. Sleep was divided into short periods between vigils and prayers. Silence, meditation, and reflection were practiced to maintain spiritual discipline. Noise, distractions, or indulgent rest were minimized. Even in the dead of night, the spiritual schedule dictated activity and rest. These routines influenced broader cultural perceptions of sleep, shaping expectations for laypeople as well. The religious framing of sleep also tied closely to health and morality. Nighttime was seen as a vulnerable period when evil spirits, demons, or bad influences could affect the body or soul. Protective measures, holy water, charms, prayer beads, or recitation of scripture were used to guard against these threats. Sleep, in this context, wasn't passive. It was a carefully managed, spiritually conscious activity. Pilgrims and travelers carried portable rituals with them, small crosses, written prayers, or scented herbs to encourage safe sleep on the road. Even nobles traveling between estates maintained spiritual routines, reciting prayers before bed or invoking divine protection for themselves and their households. Religion provided both structure and comfort in unpredictable environments. Nighttime awakenings often prompted spiritual reflection. Waking at midnight or during first or second sleep wasn't unusual. People used these moments to pray, meditate, or recount dreams. Spiritual activity and rest were interwoven, creating a rhythm of conscious attention and unconscious rest. The medieval concept of sleep encompassed more than physical rejuvenation. It was an ongoing moral and spiritual practice. Even festivals, holy days, and religious seasons influenced sleep patterns. Fasting periods, feast days, and holy observances altered bedtime routines, meals, and nighttime rituals. Community-wide events meant extended wakefulness, communal prayers, or late-night feasts, all interlaced with concern for spiritual readiness. Sleep was embedded in the cultural and religious fabric, not merely a personal necessity. So tonight, as you tuck into your own modern bed, imagine a medieval household preparing for sleep, candles flickering, herbs scenting the air, prayers whispered softly, and family members or monks observing routines that combined body and soul. Sleep wasn't only physical, it was spiritual, moral, and culturally structured. Medieval sleep, shaped by religion, reminds us that humans have long recognized the interconnectedness of body, mind, and spirit. And as you drift off tonight, carry a gentle awareness that rest, rituals, and protection have always been part of the human journey through the night. All right, so we've floated through religion, rituals, and spiritual sleep. Now let's drift into the slightly less glamorous, but equally important, world of hygiene, nighttime illness, and the remedies medieval people relied on. Because, yes, sleep wasn't just about comfort or superstition, it was also about surviving germs, drafts, and unpredictable health issues. Personal hygiene in the Middle Ages was, well, let's say, rudimentary by modern standards. Baths were infrequent, sometimes weekly or monthly, depending on status. Nobles might have more access to running water or shared bathhouses, but most common folk bathed rarely and relied on dry cleaning methods, rubbing the skin with cloths, changing linen sheets, or dusting off with powders and herbs. Cleanliness before sleep was partly ritual, partly practical. Removing dirt, lice, or grime reduced the risk of disease, or at least the perception of it. Nighttime illness was a constant concern. Cold drafts, poorly insulated beds, and damp straw mattresses contributed to colds, fevers, and respiratory issues. Sleep itself was both a preventive measure and a vulnerability. Resting was necessary for survival, but vulnerability increased. While unconscious, remedies were a mix of superstition, herbal knowledge, and basic observation. Herbs played a huge role. Chamomile, lavender, mint, thyme, and sage were tucked into pillows, placed under mattresses, or brewed into teas. These weren't just for scent. They were believed to prevent nightmares, encourage restful sleep, and ward off illness. A bed surrounded by herbs was both aromatic and medicinal, a floating combination of comfort and health. For more serious illnesses, people used poultices, salves, and other home remedies. Honey, vinegar, and various plant extracts were applied to ease symptoms like fever or congestion. Nobles might have access to apothecaries, while peasants relied on local herbalists or family knowledge passed down through generations. Nighttime care often involved placing the sick near a fire, layering blankets, or administering herbal infusions while the person slept. Sleep was part of the healing process. Even the architecture of sleeping spaces reflected health concerns. Raised beds kept sleepers off damp floors, while thick curtains or wall hangings blocked drafts. Fires provided warmth, but smoke had to be managed carefully. Hygiene, warmth, and ventilation were surprisingly sophisticated considerations for the time, even if they seem primitive to us now. Animals, which often shared the sleeping area, contributed both warmth and risk. Cats, dogs, and small livestock helped keep beds warm during long winters, but also carried fleas, dirt, and disease. Medieval households accepted these compromises, warmth versus hygiene, and adapted accordingly. Sleep required negotiation with both nature and necessity. Preventive practices included diet, exercise, and daily routines. People believed that proper meals, moderate activity, and timing of work and rest influenced sleep quality and susceptibility to illness. The boundary between lifestyle, health, and sleep was fluid. Medieval people observed patterns carefully, even if they didn't have modern science to explain them. So tonight, as you settle into your own modern bed, imagine medieval people layering blankets, sprinkling herbs, tending to their children, or soothing a sick family member. Picture the warmth of a fire, the scent of herbs, and the constant negotiation between comfort, cleanliness, and survival. Sleep wasn't just rest. It was a complex, multi-layered act of hygiene, care, and adaptation. Medieval hygiene and remedies remind us that humans have always intertwined health and rest. Even in less than ideal conditions, people developed clever strategies to survive the night. And as you drift off tonight, consider the ingenuity, observation, and resilience that shaped centuries of sleep. All right, so we've floated through hygiene, remedies, and private sleep. Now let's drift into the social side of medieval nights. Because for most people, sleep wasn't a solo activity. It was loud, crowded, and occasionally chaotic. Many households, especially among peasants, practiced communal sleeping. Families shared beds to conserve warmth, save space, and accommodate everyone under one roof. Sometimes, multiple generations slept together, along with a few animals for extra heat. Privacy was a luxury. Warmth and survival took precedence. Imagine trying to drift off while an elderly relative snores, a baby fusses, and a cat curls up at your feet. It wasn't exactly quiet meditation, but it worked. In inns, guild halls, and monasteries, communal sleeping was even more pronounced. Travelers, apprentices, or soldiers often slept in long rows of straw mattresses. Noise, snoring, coughing, and shifting bodies were standard. Medieval people adapted by creating personal routines, praying, layering blankets, or using herbs to block odors or distractions. Social negotiation was as important as physical comfort. Crowded sleeping arrangements also influenced behavior. People became tolerant of disruptions and developed small rituals to carve out personal space. A blanket folded a certain way, a pillow positioned just so, or a small charm under the bed could create a sense of security. Psychological adaptation was key. Sleep was as much about mental preparation as physical rest. Nighttime life didn't stop entirely for communal sleepers. Children needed care. Chores were sometimes completed late, and domestic tasks continued even after dusk. Fires were tended, animals fed, and food prepared for the next day. Sleep happened in cycles, interrupted and segmented, rather than in one continuous block. The rhythm of life dictated the rhythm of sleep. Social dynamics also played a role. Households had hierarchies, and sleeping arrangements reflected status. Parents, elders, or heads of households often took the best positions near warmth or fire, while children, servants, or apprentices made do with less optimal spots. Sleep reinforced social structure as subtly as meals or chores. In monasteries, communal sleep was structured differently. Silence, order, and staggered schedules maintained peace. Monks or nuns rose for vigils or prayers, often moving quietly to avoid disturbing others. Even in close quarters, the community enforced discipline, showing how social norms shaped nighttime behavior. Noise, temperature, and smell were constant considerations. Humans coexisting in tight spaces had to negotiate sound and scent, finding tolerance for the imperfections of others. Bedding, clothing, and physical positioning became tools for survival and social harmony. Sleep wasn't passive. It was an active, negotiated practice. So tonight, as you settle into your own modern bed, imagine medieval families, travelers, and monks navigating crowded halls, snoring companions, and chilly nights. Picture rituals, layered blankets, and gentle negotiation to secure a few hours of rest. Social life and sleep were inseparable. Survival depended on cooperation, adaptability, and resilience. Medieval communal sleeping reminds us that rest has always been a social as well as physical necessity. And as you drift off tonight, let the memory of crowded halls, layered blankets, and human ingenuity accompany your own quiet, solitary comfort. All right, so we've floated through communal sleeping and crowded halls. Now, let's drift into the more festive side of medieval nights. Because not every nighttime was cold, dark, or fraught with superstition. Some nights were lively, full of music, food, and human connection. Medieval people marked seasons and festivals with gatherings that often extended late into the night. Feasts for harvests, religious holidays, or local celebrations were opportunities to eat, drink, and socialize. Nobles might host banquets with elaborate dishes, while peasants enjoyed more modest fare, still celebratory and deeply communal. These nights broke the monotony of daily labor and provided mental and emotional relief. Music and storytelling were central to these events. Minstrels, bards, or local singers entertained, sometimes accompanied by dancing. Even in colder regions, indoor spaces rang with song, laughter, and rhythmic movement. The energy of celebration sometimes extended sleep cycles, with people going to bed later than usual, yet often still waking with the sun as part of their natural rhythm. Feasts were also strategic. They reinforced social hierarchies, displayed wealth and generosity, and facilitated alliances. Nobles used food, drink, and entertainment to impress guests, while peasants used festivals to bond with neighbors, exchange news, and temporarily escape labor demands. Nighttime celebrations served both social and psychological purposes. Religious festivals added another layer. Certain nights required vigil, prayer, or ceremonial activity, blending celebration with devotion. Candlelit processions, communal prayers, and ritualistic performances were common. Even in festivity, spiritual considerations shaped timing, behavior, and the use of space. Sleep was delayed, but in a structured, culturally meaningful way. Food and drink influenced sleep too. Heavy meals, rich wines, or sweet treats often led to restless nights. Yet these indulgences were culturally sanctioned and even expected. Medieval people balanced pleasure and practicality, understanding that celebrations might disrupt sleep, but the communal, emotional, and spiritual benefits were worth it. Cold nights didn't always prevent gatherings. Fires, torches, and heated halls allowed for continued activity. People adapted clothing, bedding, and seating to accommodate warmth while engaging in festivities. Nighttime, in this context, was a space for both survival and enjoyment, ritual and revelry. Children often participated in scaled-down versions of celebrations. Songs, simple games, and family-based rituals prepared them for full participation as adults. Storytelling continued alongside feasting, teaching moral lessons, entertaining, and shaping imagination. Even late night, these moments reinforced culture and community cohesion. So tonight, as you settle into your own modern bed, imagine the flickering torchlight, the hum of voices, the clatter of plates, and the warmth of communal celebration. Picture families, neighbors, and entire villages embracing the night with food, song, and ritual. Medieval nights weren't just about rest. They were about living, connecting, and celebrating the rhythms of life. Medieval festivals remind us that nighttime has always been multidimensional, a space for sleep, socialization, ritual, and joy. And as you drift off tonight, let the echoes of candlelit laughter, rhythmic songs, and communal warmth accompany your own peaceful slumber. All right, so we've floated through festivals, feasts, and candlelit celebrations. Now, let's drift into the less festive, more practical side of medieval nights. Because not everyone got to sleep immediately after sunset. Nighttime work was very real, and it shaped sleep habits in fascinating ways. For peasants, labor didn't always end at dusk. Seasonal demands, urgent repairs, or tending to animals sometimes required extended hours. Milking, feeding livestock, mending fences, or repairing roofs by moonlight were not uncommon. Sleep became segmented and secondary to survival. People adapted, often sleeping in shifts or taking brief naps during the day to compensate for nighttime exertion. In towns, tradespeople and artisans faced similar constraints. Nighttime was often quieter, allowing for tasks that needed focus or privacy. Bakers, blacksmiths, and weavers sometimes worked late to prepare for the next day. Candlelight or oil lamps illuminated workshops, creating a rhythm of activity that blended work and rest in subtle, adaptive ways. Travel at night brought additional challenges. Roads were poorly lit, dangerous, and often infested with wildlife or highwaymen. Travelers relied on inns, monasteries, or friendly households for temporary lodging. Sleeping arrangements were dictated by safety, warmth, and social connection rather than comfort. A straw mattress in a crowded hall was better than the risk of the open road. Weather and seasonal shifts complicated matters further. Winter nights were long and freezing. Spring rains could flood streets and fields. People learned to adapt, using fires, layering blankets, and adjusting schedules to the rhythm of light, temperature, and labor demands. Sleep became a strategic activity, carefully timed and protected. Even in noble households, nighttime work existed, though in a different form. Stewarding estates, reviewing accounts, or overseeing household staff sometimes required late hours. Servants and laborers, in the employ of the wealthy, had their own nocturnal routines, balancing obligation, fatigue, and limited personal space. Sleep was socially stratified, yet universally necessary. Noise and interruptions were omnipresent. Animals, neighbors, snoring family members, or village events often broke sleep cycles. People learned tolerance, patience, and the ability to rest amid chaos. Mental preparation became as important as physical comfort. Sleep was skillful, adaptive, and integrated with life's unpredictable rhythms. Nighttime work also intersected with superstition and ritual. People believed certain hours were unlucky or vulnerable, leading to prayers, charms, or strategic timing of labor. Spiritual and practical concerns were intertwined, creating a framework where work, rest, and protection existed simultaneously. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, imagine medieval hands repairing tools by candlelight, tending animals in frosty barns, or walking cautiously along dark roads. Picture the careful balance between exhaustion, necessity, and survival. Sleep wasn't guaranteed. It had to be earned, negotiated, and protected. Medieval nighttime labor reminds us that rest has always been conditional, adaptive, and intertwined with survival. And as you drift off tonight, let the rhythm of human resilience, careful preparation, and endurance accompany your own peaceful slumber. All right, so we've floated through nighttime labor and practical survival. Now let's gently drift into the inner world. The dreams, nightmares, and psychological challenges that shaped medieval sleep. Because even if your bed was warm and your blankets layered, the mind had its own ways of keeping you awake. Nightmares were taken seriously. People believed that bad dreams could signal impending danger, moral failings, or supernatural threats. A restless night wasn't just fatigue. It could be a warning from God, a visit from a demon, or a message from the spirit world. This wasn't paranoia. It was a culturally informed awareness of how fragile life and sleep really were. Sleep disturbances weren't uncommon. Hunger, illness, stress, and anxiety frequently interrupted rest. Peasants worried about crops, lords worried about taxes, and everyone worried about disease. Nighttime was psychologically charged, full of tension, anticipation, and occasional terror. People adapted by creating calming rituals, prayer, song, storytelling, or visualization exercises to guide the mind toward rest. Children's sleep was particularly influenced by psychological factors. Fear of the dark, stories of spirits, or anticipation of chores could make falling asleep difficult. Parents employed protective rituals, placing charms under pillows, reciting prayers, or telling reassuring stories. Sleep education, in a sense, was culturally embedded, passing knowledge from generation to generation about how to calm the mind and body before bed. Even the wealthy, insulated from some physical hardships, experienced psychological stress. Political intrigue, courtly pressure, and family dynamics often led to insomnia, restlessness, or vivid dreams. Nobles might consult physicians, astrologers, or spiritual advisors to interpret dreams and restore mental equilibrium. Psychological rest was treated with as much care as physical comfort. Nightmares and restless sleep were sometimes attributed to imbalances in the body's humors. Medieval medical theory suggested that too much bile, phlegm, or blood could disturb the mind during sleep. Remedies included herbal teas, warm baths, adjusted diet, or calming exercises before bed. Sleep was both a physical and mental balancing act. Communal living added another layer. Snoring, coughing, or sudden movements from other sleepers could trigger anxiety or awakenings. Medieval people learned tolerance, flexibility, and self-soothing techniques. Mental resilience was necessary for surviving the night intact, both physically and psychologically. Storytelling, rituals, and bedtime prayers all served as protective mechanisms against psychological unrest. Reciting familiar passages, hearing calming tales, or visualizing divine protection helped structure the mind's transition from wakefulness to sleep. Nighttime was recognized as a liminal space, demanding attention, ritual, and awareness to ensure rest. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, imagine medieval people navigating the fragile terrain of their own minds. Picture protective rituals, soothing words, and imaginative exercises as shields against restless nights. Consider how awareness of danger, anxiety, and dreams shaped sleep patterns for centuries. Medieval psychological rest reminds us that sleep is never purely physical. Mind, body, and environment intertwine, and humans have long developed strategies to protect both. And as you drift off tonight, let the careful, culturally informed practices of the past guide your own peaceful slumber. All right, so we've floated through nightmares and psychological rest. Now let's drift into the colorful, slightly eccentric world of superstitions and protective rituals that shaped medieval sleep. Because for medieval people, a good night's sleep was as much about spiritual and magical safeguards as it was about blankets and warmth. Many households had charms or talismans specifically intended to ward off evil spirits or bad dreams. Small figurines, carved symbols, or written prayers were tucked under pillows, hung on walls, or placed near beds. Even peasants with limited resources used simple tokens, herbs, small crosses, or sewn symbols to create a protective atmosphere for rest. Safety was never just physical, it was also spiritual and symbolic. Nighttime superstitions were highly detailed. Some believed that the first dream after sleep predicted the future, while others feared that sleeping with your head facing a particular direction could invite illness. Certain nights were considered especially dangerous, associated with malevolent spirits, witches, or unlucky omens. People structured their sleep and rituals around these beliefs, integrating caution and culture seamlessly. Herbs played double duty. Chamomile, sage, and lavender were calming, aromatic, and medicinal, but they were also believed to ward off spirits. Sprigs of rosemary or rue might be pinned to beds, hung from ceilings, or placed under pillows. Smoke from burning herbs, candles, or incense created protective barriers that comforted sleepers and signaled ritual attention to unseen threats. Bedtime rituals often combined prayer, visualization, and charm use. People recited protective phrases, crossed themselves, or whispered blessings before lying down. These acts weren't just habit, they were culturally ingrained strategies to manage fear, uncertainty, and vulnerability. Even children learned these routines, understanding that ritual was a reliable companion for the dark hours. Furniture and bed placement were influenced by superstition too. Beds were positioned carefully, sometimes against walls or in corners, to minimize exposure to wandering spirits or drafty areas thought to harbor supernatural danger. Curtains, hangings, and even pets served protective roles. Cats and dogs were believed to guard the home spiritually, in addition to physically keeping pests away. Folk stories reinforced these practices. Tales of spirits, malevolent witches, or wandering demons circulated widely. Fear of the unknown was tempered by ritual, charm, and repetition. Sleep became both a cultural performance and a personal negotiation with unseen forces. In essence, bedtime was an active exercise in imagination, morality, and spiritual vigilance. Even the wealthy, with access to priests, apothecaries, and luxury items, relied on similar strategies. Elaborate charms, protective amulets, and ritualistic prayers were standard. Nobles understood that vulnerability during sleep was universal, transcending social status. Everyone needed a little magic, or at least the comfort of believing it existed, to rest fully. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, imagine medieval people placing charms under pillows, whispering protective words, or arranging herbs carefully. Picture homes alive with tiny acts of care, ritual, and superstition, all designed to guard sleep. The medieval night was more than darkness. It was a stage for imagination, vigilance, and protective creativity. Medieval bedtime superstitions remind us that humans have always combined practicality, ritual, and imagination to survive the night. And as you drift off tonight, let the careful, sometimes quirky, protective rituals of the past guide your own peaceful slumber. All right, so we've floated through superstitions and protective rituals. Now, let's drift into the physical side of medieval sleep. Beds, mattresses, and the quest for comfort. Because even in a world full of charms, herbs, and crowded halls, people still wanted something soft to lie on. Beds in the Middle Ages were status symbols as much as functional furniture. Nobles slept on raised wooden frames, often elaborately carved and curtained for privacy. The higher the bed, the more prestigious the sleeper, and also the warmer. Elevated beds kept drafts and pests at bay. Peasants, in contrast, often slept on simple, straw-stuffed mattresses laid directly on wooden platforms, or even the floor. Comfort was relative, but survival always came first. Mattresses themselves were an adventure. Stuffing varied depending on wealth and availability. Straw, reeds, feathers, wool, or horsehair were common. Straw was cheap but prickly. Feathers were luxurious, but required constant fluffing and maintenance. Mattress hygiene was rudimentary. Regular airing and occasional replacement were key. Lice and bedbugs were omnipresent, meaning medieval people often woke with an itch or two. It was a combination of comfort, practicality, and unavoidable annoyance. Bedding accessories mattered too. Blankets, quilts, and sheets were layered for warmth, decoration, and status. Curtains around beds weren't just decorative. They retained heat, reduced drafts, and provided privacy in crowded rooms. Pillows were sometimes filled with feathers, wool, or herbs, providing minor comfort while also serving functional roles in posture and support. Temperature regulation was crucial. Fires, braziers, and hot water bottles, or heated bricks wrapped in cloth, helped maintain warmth during long, cold nights. Nobles could afford specialized warming devices. Peasants relied on body heat from family, animals, or layering. Sleeping arrangements were a delicate balance of warmth, space, and practicality. Even small details mattered. The positioning of the bed, the type of blankets, and the layering of mattresses reflected both comfort preferences and survival strategies. Medieval people observed which arrangements minimized cold, pests, or noise, fine-tuning sleep environments over generations. Sleep comfort was a learned skill, passed down through experience and observation. Luxury wasn't just for nobles. Some monasteries, guilds, or wealthy townspeople invested in better mattresses and bedding to improve health and productivity. They recognized that well-rested individuals were more capable of work, prayer, or creativity. Comfort and function were intertwined, and sleep quality mattered. Even in a world without modern foam or temperature control. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, imagine medieval mattresses layered with straw, feathers, or wool. Picture curtains drawn against drafts, blankets stacked high, and small creatures sharing warmth. Consider the care and ingenuity that went into creating a sleep space despite the challenges of the era. Medieval beds remind us that comfort has always been a pursuit of human ingenuity. Even amid pests, cold, and crowded halls, people adapted and refined their sleep environments. And as you drift off tonight, let the creativity, patience, and perseverance of past sleepers accompany your own modern comfort. All right, so we've floated through beds, mattresses, and comfort. Now let's drift into one of the coziest corners of medieval nights: entertainment, storytelling, and oral traditions. Because not every night was about labor, superstition, or survival. Sometimes it was about connection, imagination, and gentle amusement. Even in peasant cottages, after chores were done and animals were settled, families gathered around dim candlelight or the dying embers of a fire. Stories were told, tales of local heroes, mischievous spirits, and legendary battles. These narratives entertained, educated, and reinforced community values, passing knowledge and culture from one generation to the next. Minstrels, Traveling storytellers and bards brought the wider world into villages and towns. They performed in halls, marketplaces, and inns, captivating audiences with song, poetry, and drama. Their performances often lasted late into the night, creating a shared social experience that balanced the day's hardships. Even a cold, crowded hall could feel magical under the spell of a good tale. Nobles had their own version of nighttime entertainment. Courtiers would gather in chambers for music, dance, riddles, and recitations. Storytelling in these settings wasn't just leisure. It reinforced political alliances, showcased wit, and demonstrated literacy or education. Even in wealth and privilege, nighttime was a space for communal imagination and social bonding. Stories also provided a safe outlet for emotions, fears, and curiosity. Tales of supernatural beings, legendary heroes, or moral lessons allowed listeners to explore dangers, ethics, and desires in a controlled, imaginative environment. Dreams and daytime experiences often blended with stories, influencing behavior and cultural understanding. For children, storytelling was both education and entertainment. Oral traditions taught practical skills, social norms, and survival strategies in a memorable, engaging way. Bedtime stories weren't just comforting, they were tools for learning, shaping values, and preparing for adulthood. Even in the harshest conditions, humor found its way into storytelling. Jokes, exaggerated tales, and playful narratives offered relief from daily stress, creating a sense of joy despite adversity. Medieval nights weren't just about survival, they were about resilience, imagination, and the human need for connection. So tonight, as you settle into your own bed, imagine families huddled around fires, children listening wide-eyed, neighbors sharing tales, and minstrels performing in distant halls. Picture laughter, suspense, and gentle wonder filling the darkness. Even in a world without screens or modern distractions, nights were alive with stories, culture, and human creativity. Medieval nighttime entertainment reminds us that sleep and rest are only part of the story. Connection, imagination, and storytelling have always been central to human experience. And as you drift off tonight, let the echoes of medieval voices, flickering fires, and shared imagination carry you into a peaceful, story-filled slumber. So tonight, as you drift off, let the echoes of medieval voices, flickering fires, and shared imagination carry you into a peaceful, story-filled slumber. Close your eyes, feel the weight of the day melt away, and let your mind wander freely through the candle-lit halls, crowded cottages, and quiet forests of the past. Wherever you are tonight, we'd love to know. Where are you listening from? And most importantly, good night, sleep well, and let tomorrow greet you a little lighter, a little calmer, and a lot more free.